Next up, we have Abraham Lucas, the offensive tackle out of Washington State, who for me was a pretty interesting guy because he was one of the later tackles that I did, one of the final guys, and he really fit into the same mold as two other guys that I did in Rasheed Walker and Nicholas Petit-Frere, and both of those guys were towards the end of my board as well as Lucas was. But I don't think they're bad players. I think they have good intangibles, both physically, in terms of their athleticism, as well as in terms of their size. And I just think that there's some stuff in their game in terms of the technical side of things that maybe needs to be refined and maybe just isn't quite up to par that I think it needs to be to start day one. I don't think any of these guys are necessarily bad players, but I do think that I'm probably a little bit lower on them than most might be from what I've seen in the national media. So in terms of what are some of those things, we'll just go through some of my notes, bouncing back and forth between positives and negatives, as well as referencing my grade sheet. So I thought one real positive was his usage of length. And, length is a term that a lot of people use, and I don't think they really know what they're talking about, because you could have 100-inch arms, right? But it all depends on when you throw your punches. So it's not just the physically having length, it is the usage of length and being able to time your punches accordingly to use that length to the fullest extent. So Lucas has 33.875 inch arms, and I thought he did a really good job timing his punches to utilize that length to the fullest extent, right? Keeping guys out of his chest and away from his body. Generally, for the most part, I thought that was one of his better areas. That being said, when guys were able to blitz his midpoint, was one of my notes, he struggled to anchor. So once they split his hands and got into his chest, it didn't seem as though he was necessarily the strongest guy in terms of being able to reestablish leverage and win back the rep. It seemed like he was more so just getting walked back into QBs, which obviously is something that you would want to clean up in terms of, maybe flopping and anchoring, which is a technique where you sort of jump back, take both feet out of the ground, and detach and leap back to try and reestablish the separation between you and the edge rusher. There wasn't a lot of that, and that's probably the most widely used technique in terms of preventing a bull rush from escalating to that next point where you get driven all the way to the QB. That's sort of a last resort, and maybe that's something that you would want to teach a guy like Abraham Lucas to try and get a little bit better at when guys split his hands. In terms of some other positives, I thought he did a really good job collapsing three techniques on down blocks. I thought that compared to some of those other guys that I mentioned earlier, he was decently effective as a run blocker inside, whereas maybe some of those other guys were better on, say, reach blocks and climbing to the second level. I thought that Lucas was probably the most capable of those three that I mentioned at, just between the tackles, moving guys off the line of scrimmage. And in that regard, I gave him an 11.5 on run blocking. I know one issue that I thought there was in regards to his run blocking was having a heavy hat. Now, what that means, that's kind of a phrase that one of my coaches used to use, but it's having too much of your weight forward, right? So guys can kind of easily dump you on your face if they decide to move and pull you down, right? You're easily susceptible. You don't have great balance, and that was one of the grades I gave him, a little bit lower than the rest, 5.5 out of 10. In terms of some other negatives that I thought were there, I didn't think he necessarily had an overly high motor. That was one thing that I noted, which wasn't particularly that doesn't make you feel good necessarily when it felt like he was almost blocking on a timer, if it's an inside zone play and generally it takes 3 seconds for the running back to get through the line of scrimmage, and maybe I'll block for 3.5 and then kind of slow up a little bit. Well, what happens if the running back is still bouncing around and you kind of let up on your block early? It just seemed like there was small stuff like that could be a result of some motor concerns. Not necessarily the worst thing in the world, but just you got to work through the whistle, in my opinion, and that's something that Lucas would do on occasion, but not all the time. I thought another positive, bouncing back up there, I thought he had sufficient athleticism, and I thought he was effective when climbing to the second level. I know I mentioned some of those other guys were better, but for him still, you saw at the combine, He had decent, he had good times, I'll say, in terms of his 40, his shuttle, his 3-cone, and I thought you saw that working forwards, maybe more so than you did laterally in terms of, say, on reach blocks, by example, if that makes sense. I thought he was better at the line of scrimmage on more of the physical blocks, while also being all right in terms of climbing to the second level, in that regard, if that makes sense. Hopefully I explained that decently well. Some other notes that I had in terms of his footwork. I thought this was really his biggest concern, in my opinion. I gave him a 16.5 out of 25 on Pass Pro, and it was mainly because, I'll just read you the note exactly. Footwork can occasionally get sloppy in terms of clicking heels together and compromising base. So what does that mean? It means that instead of maintaining your right foot, let's say we'll say he's at left tackle, right? Or right tackle. We'll use right tackle, obviously. That would make more sense. It depends on whichever one you played would maybe be the one you're more familiar with. But in Lucas's case, we'll go right tackle. So he's a right tackle. He wants to maintain his left foot up in his stagger throughout the whole time, and you almost want there to be like a bar between your feet, right? Because then you have a solid wide base, and you never want your feet to really like come in close together because, for example, go grab a partner, go grab your dad, your brother, anybody, your mom, for instance, and stand up straight, just upright in the air with your feet shoulder width apart, and then stand upright in the air with your feet, together like you're going to bend over and touch your toes, and have them shove you just from the side or from the front or wherever each time, and see which one you feel more wobbly on. It's going to assuredly be when you have your feet closer together, because you have less of a narrow, or you have a more narrow base, less of a wide base, and your weight is more vertical opposed to being spread out over a wider area. So in that regard, one thing Lucas will do is while he's setting, he will click his heels together. And, oftentimes you'll do that when you're kind of panicked. That's what I found in my experience. I would do that when I was panicked in terms of there's a speed rusher out there and I got to really abandon ship and get out to block him on the island as quickly as possible. And as I'm setting out there, rushing out there, my feet are clicking together more of like a quick shuffle than an actual, kick slide pass set. So that was an issue, because then, what guys in the NFL do is they'll read that and they'll maybe initially be going for a speed rush, but then once they see your heels are clicking together, they'll time that up perfectly and convert that speed to power, bend that right back into you, and just plow you right into the quarterback. Right, that's not something that you necessarily want. And the last main negative that I had was that his feet could die on occasion. I think that maybe comes back to his motor, but as a run blocker, like I said, he was maybe the best of those three at the line of scrimmage in terms of just getting guys off that initial spot. But then from there, in terms of continuing that block and fighting through contact, maybe winning some of those stalemates, for instance. It felt like his feet would occasionally just sort of die out, and he would almost get stiff-legged, which obviously isn't good. You're not going to generate any movement if you aren't moving yourself and trying to forcibly move the defender. And it just felt like there were reps like that where he maybe didn't do so. So again, all in all, the good thing is a lot of that is fixable. What's not fixable is the athleticism and the combine times and all that stuff, right? Like those are raw things that you can't teach anybody. So Abraham has those, and if you are a coaching staff that thinks you can teach up and coach up some of these areas where we've identified problems here, then maybe you have a higher grade on him than this. Personally, I weight my scale to where it's more technical and nuance based than it is, say, just raw size and athleticism. In terms of size and athleticism, I gave him a 4.25 on size and a 4.5 on athleticism. I thought he was good in both, right? But I just didn't think we saw those two things, the size and the athleticism, married. I didn't see we saw that marriage between that and good technique that's going to win you reps on a consistent basis at the NFL. So for me, a little bit lower. But like I said, with those other two guys, Rasheed Walker as well as Petit Frere, to me, it doesn't mean all hope is lost, right? It means that maybe you use him as in a backup role, pair him with a veteran. I keep saying this. Give him somebody who knows what it takes to win at the next level, to mirror that guy. Essentially just have him work out with that guy, have him practice with that guy, have him do everything, and hopefully some of that veteran's good habits will start to rub off on Lucas while you're coaching him and showing him the right way to do things. So I would say probably Probably won't be a starter right away, at least in my opinion. He personally wouldn't be on my team. I would want him as a backup as I tear down some of those bad habits, and then from there work on building up good ones that not only utilize his athleticism and size, but also utilize sound technique that can really help support a long career here for Mr. Lucas. So with that being said, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I know you might not be if you are a Lucas fan, but or a fan of the team that just drafted him, but I do think that there is some potential here. Just have to maybe dig a little bit deeper to cultivate that, if that makes sense in regards to Lucas. So with that, that's all I have for you guys in this one. Hopefully you enjoyed, and if you did, leave a like, subscribe, all those good things. That way you're in the loop with my future content, and you can check out my latest videos.